All right, well, greetings. And as you can see, I'm adapting, but I think I'm safe right now, so I'm going to take this off. Seriously, I hope everybody's okay and in doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is staying at least 6 feet from each other and wearing something over their face. Um, and today I want to move back into this dialogue that I've been trying to conduct, I guess, between these two authors, the author of Desert, the Desert Manifesto, an anarchist work, and the Green State author, Robyn Eckersley. So you may recall a couple of weeks ago I did an interview with Spencer Hess from Kansas City about the legacy of the Enlightenment. And this keeps coming up especially in Desert's writings, but also it resonates through Eckersley's book. Desert says near the beginning of his work, the idea of progress as central to the modern Western paradigm and the presumption that the entire world was moving ever onwards to a better future was dominant. The idea of the inevitability or possibility of a global libertarian future originates from that belief. So what he's referring to there is this faith in progress that certainly resonated in the 20th century despite everything, and which was shared by a lot of different ideological perspectives and still is. And what Desert is saying is that in addition to the top most memorable contenders, socialism and communism, we have also the global vision of libertarian anarchism. And Desert is backing away from that, okay? That sort of grand narrative. This is a quote from the book I wrote and published last year in 2019. It's called Ideological Possession and the Rise of the New Right. So this is a quote from the beginning of my book. And I chose it because the book primarily deals with the 20th century ideologies such as socialism, communism, fascism, liberal democracy / capitalism. But Desert is saying the same sort of thing applies to anarchism as well. In the age of scientific enlightenment, which continues to unfold, mankind has rejected the belief that the gods dwell above and has become convinced that they are nothing more than projections of human psychological needs and wishes. But the gods, as it were, have returned with a vengeance in the disastrous politics of the 20th and 21st centuries. They have returned in the form of mass movements of the right and left, in the destruction of total war caused by total enmity, in the slide into ever-increasing identification with and dependence on liberal big government, in the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, and subsequent endless wars on terror, and most recently in the marked upswing in Western ethno-nationalism and identitarianism. I was drawing a lot from the political thought of Carl Jung, but this way of thinking about ideologies and, quote, ideological possession is an idea that is well beyond just Carl Jung. Charles Taylor, in his own way, reflects this view. In general, the view is that human beings are religious by nature, that there's something about a deep psychological need for a grand narrative, which has an ending in a much better place, a place of perfection or completion or fulfillment. And if that desire is not met by some sort of traditional or even non-traditional faith that places hope in some other world other than our world here, that what you will get is secular religions. And as people put their energy into those secular religions, they can metastasize, and because human beings can never live up to the utopian expectations that are embedded in them psychologically, they go off the rails. Something like this is what Desert is admitting can happen to anarchists as well. In particular, he mentions libertarian anarchists, but in general, this idea that at some point in human history, we will be ready to have the abolishment of the nation state, and everybody will be able to govern themselves independently, cooperatively, and without competition. This author of Desert is basically saying that is another utopian vision, and it's one that he no longer believes in. So here's a couple of quotes from Desert, again near the beginning. He says, "The belief that universal peace and beauty would be reached through apocalyptic tumults of blood and fire, revolution, the millennium, the collapse, indicates firmly that as an Enlightenment ideology, anarchism has been heavily burdened by its Euro-Christian origins. It's an Enlightenment philosophy, and there's a connection between Euro-Christian origins and Enlightenment ideology. Enlightenment ideology carried the same pattern, historical march of progress leading to an end." And Desert says the idea of a global movement confronting a global present and creating a global future has many apostles, but he is no longer one of them. So this is what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago regarding the legacy of the Enlightenment. One of the aspects of it was the tendency for people to put their energy into a secular ideology and not be able to separate themselves from it psychologically, emotionally, and become captured by it. Not to be left out, of course, capitalists or people who believe in liberal democracy and capitalism are also engaging in a type of ideological possession. And this is something that I tried very hard to get across in my book, as well as many other authors that I covered in that book and that I've covered on this channel have also made that argument. It is an ideology, and it has a narrative, a historical narrative, and it aims in the direction of this perfect future, most clearly expressed in the writings of Francis Fukuyama back in the 90s, but really implied, for instance, very strongly in thinkers like Milton Friedman and other advocates of free market capitalism, who treat it as though it is the ultimate solution and extremely rational and always the right choice. Desert says of capitalism, the illusion of a singular world capitalist present is mirrored by the illusion of a single world anarchist future. Okay? So that's some humility, being able to see the link in the way of thinking between the person who more or less adores capitalism and the person who adores anarchism. You may recall that prior to this series, I covered Mackenzie Wark's book, Capital is Dead. Is This Something Worse? Here's a quote from Wark. She says, "One thing that the left and the right now seem to agree on is that the society in which we live is called capitalism, and strangely enough, both now seem to think that it is eternal." And of course, she's arguing against that. She sees people clinging to this idea that this is an eternal form or that we can do no better as a psychological groove. In other words, it's not eternal. Nothing is eternal. Everything that we know about history says that nothing lasts forever. So the impression that we cannot change and that there cannot be anything new or nothing that we haven't done before is more of a psychological groove that we get stuck in than it is a reality. But getting to think deeply and well about our future does require us to get out of the groove. Mark Fisher in Capitalist Realism, another thinker who makes this point, he says it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Right? And of course, Fisher also is trying to help people understand that it's more or less a fantasy for Fisher, that people have to kind of get around to be able to think well enough, right? Because change is going to happen no matter what, whether we think well or not. But if we don't think well, we're going to get change haphazardly and probably for the worst. If we're able to actually think strategically about where we want to go in the future, we have more of a chance of that future being good. And I think this is a point to reintroduce Eckersley, whose book, The Green State, is nothing if not diverse in its way of thinking. Eckersley is not an ideologue of any kind. She's certainly not a socialist ideologue. In fact, I suspect that one of the reasons why her book wasn't universally well received is because Eckersley chooses to not be extremely ideologically consistent. You might say it's a pluralistic approach. She takes from a lot of different traditions, and she tries her best using her imagination and her aspirations to try to figure out how we can get from where we are now. So she's very concerned about the environment. She thinks that liberal democracy and capitalism have not been quite up to the challenge of trying to deal with environmental issues that we have. So she wants to transform the system into something better. But she's not calling for socialism, pure and simple, as though that's the solution, because Eckersley knows that socialist countries have done their fair share of creating the greenhouse gases that have led to climate change. What we find in her way of thinking is an appeal to deepening democracy. She's dissatisfied with liberal democracy because it's not representative enough. Lots of people aren't really represented, especially if they don't take part, but then you've also got the heavy influence of money in the system. But also, she says, the environment is not represented, species that are being trampled out are not represented, and she makes the point that we're all tied up together, as we're certainly finding out now. There's no place to really hide from the fact that the whole world is tied up together. The fate of one part becomes a part of everybody else's fate. She says at one point in her book, when the liberal democratic state permits social actors to displace ecological costs onto others, it restricts the ability of environmental victims to enjoy the full range of freedoms that liberalism supposedly upholds, including the freedom to participate or otherwise be represented in the making of decisions that bear upon their lives. So there you see that expression of the call for a deeper democracy, in which all points of view are brought to the table, and people have to grapple with them all in order to get a solution that works for everybody. Is this ideal? Absolutely. One of the things that one picks up from this book is that there is an idealism in Eckersley. She's talking about the future she wants. And people can be critical of that, but however, in order to get anywhere that's better, people do have to think and imagine futures that they would like better and articulate them. This is the strategy of great idealists, right? Like Plato, for instance, St. Thomas More. So I wouldn't fault her for that. Her book is a mashup of different perspectives. and that's not necessarily bad, especially in the times that we're in. I really do think I resonate with the idea that you take from here and there so that you can put together something that actually makes sense, right? And more importantly, maybe even than making sense, has a chance of working, has a chance of appealing to people. So, in this book, The Green State, she doesn't reject liberal principles. She's not arguing against, for instance, the idea of rights, individual expression. I don't see any evidence that she's against people being represented as individuals within the system, whatever political system there is as well. She advocates for an expanded procedural democracy. So it's not democracy in the sense of we'll just all kind of reach a consensus because we're so much in tune with each other. She recognizes there's always going to be disagreements and factions, you might say. And so the point is not to get to some sort of kumbaya moment where we all agree and think the same, but rather that we all respect each other and negotiate and care enough about each other and the planet to reach agreements that actually satisfy all of the concerns that are expressed. She's not for abolishing national boundaries, right? There's no evidence here. As a matter of fact, state, the green state, the power of the state, which is what she's advocating for, okay, requires boundaries. So she's not criticizing that. And she doesn't deny the need for local governance, okay? She seems somewhat federalist in the sense that she assumes there will be a national government. There's going to be like states or provinces, and there's going to be local and maybe even sub-local, all of these layers working together. The reason why the local is important for somebody like Eckersley is because only at that smallest level can the environment really be protected, because the ecosystem in any particular area is unique to it, and the people in it are the ones who will have the most interest in protecting it and will know it and know how to do that. She says the commodifying and disembedding dynamic of modernization, which has lifted social relations out of traditional and local structures and rearranged them across more regional and global space-times, has prompted renewed efforts to defend local biodiversity, places, habitats, and vernacular cultures, and economic commodification and cultural appropriation. There is then significant potential for a wide movement towards stronger ecological modernization. So I think that says, if we really think about that statement, that says Eckersley is comfortable with the transnational as a big part of environmental improvement, also the national and the subnational, including very much the local, okay? So all of these layers she recognizes as important and valuable. Now, that doesn't make her in agreement with Desert, but it does make Desert's vision somewhat compatible with Eckersley's, because Eckersley recognizes this need for local governance. And I don't think Eckersley would mind if Desert got to do what he wants to do, which is find niches within the existing system, whatever it happens to be as it's transforming, where communities can live authentically in cooperation with each other at the local level.
But I do have a skill you might like. It's called pleasing facts. Want to try it?
No.
All right.
I'm not sure whether to take that out or not. At any rate, I just want to leave you with this thought, okay? I think I'm going to go back up here. Ralph Waldo Emerson is famous for saying, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. I love that quote. The reason why I like that so much is because theorists tend to want to be consistent above all else. But one of my favorite theorists, Edmund Burke, did not try to be consistent if consistency led to inhumanity or to foolishness. Eckersley is criticized by some people for a lack of consistency or too much of a mashup or too much idealism. But this may be a book or a way of thinking that is actually good for our times. And Desert, too, I'm thinking is taking a lot of arrows from anarchists for whom theoretical consistency, rigor, fidelity are more important than application. But I really admire thinkers like this who are saying, look, we want to actually make something happen. And so if that's the whole point of this thinking, then we need to be willing to be flexible, to compromise, to get less than 100%, to mix up ideas, and to do what we can. I think that way of thinking is eminently smart and practical. And even though theoretical consistency is important for building an argument, we have to put it in perspective. Kindness is more important. Improvement, even if a small improvement, is more important. All right, well, again, best wishes. Stay safe. Until next time.